My name is Matt Tomick. I'm the president of Energy Vision. We're a New York City-based but national environmental group that for many years now has been looking at renewable natural gas as this very large but largely untapped opportunity, not only to decarbonize the gas grid, but also the transportation system and any of those other applications of clean burning domestic fuel. So we're talking about policy, financial incentives, market forces, but really my hope is to get some perspectives from some of the LDCs that are going down this path, that are kind of trailblazing, as well as from a developer who has a couple of projects injecting in the pipeline and more under development. And so we're going to forego presentations. We're going to do quick introductory remarks from each of the panelists, and then we're going to jump right into hopefully an insightful, enlightening, interactive discussion. And certainly we hope that there are lots of questions from the audience. We want to keep this lively given that it's the end of a long day. So with that, I'll just do very quick intros. We have Don Shabazpour from National Grid. We have Nick Mark from Centerpoint Energy. And we have Mark Maloney from Optima KV. So Don, you want to?
Sure. Good afternoon. So I have to say, two people came up to me and they said, Don, wow us and don't put us to sleep. So the bar is high. There is nothing that I'm going to say that you haven't heard. So if I do have a standard script, and if I go through it, it will be repetitive. So my goal is to make sure I don't repeat anything that's been said before, and I'll give it a sort of a different flavor. Very briefly, I'll just give you a sort of a looking backwards and looking forwards. Looking backwards, you heard a lot about Staten Island. That was the basis of our sort of intellectual capital. Everything that we know at Grid started there because we know how to integrate it, we know the gas quality issues, and Dave gave me credit for Staten Island, which isn't true. If it was, or let's just give me the credit. I was 8 years old wearing a hard hat in Staten Island, you know, with grabbing gas samples and telling my parents, I can't believe the oxygen level is so high. So that was the basis. 30 years go by. In 2008-9, because being a UK utility, we said, you know, obviously we're very committed to climate change. We think that no one is thinking about RNG. So we partnered with the Bloomberg administration. We said, let's do a demonstration project at Newtown Creek, New York City's largest wastewater treatment plant. That plant should be operational next year. So maybe we'll have this, Jerome, maybe we could have this next year at Staten Island, Newtown Creek, but fingers crossed. And then we also brought developers in, and you know, we want to promote RNG. We're like, who is your biggest barrier? We want to go get them. And they were like, yeah, it's you. And it was sort of a moment that we had to actually tell our leadership, you know, the biggest barrier to RNG is us, the utilities. And our engineers said, well, we have an interconnection guideline. It's, you know, we know what to do, but no one actually had contacted us. And it was true. For 30 years, it was for Staten Island. Then we started doing our project. No one contacted us. And about 3 years ago, the phone started ringing. It was 1, 2, 3. Now we're working with 6 project developers. These are real projects. They are sort of beyond BD. They're going to happen. And the commission said also, hey, people are now contacting us, and we don't know what siloxane is. Can you utilities step up? And that, I just want to provide that context. That goes into what Kenzie was talking about. Why? Why did this happen? It was because of that. We wanted to remove that barrier. So this will be an educational document that will come out. It will be an educational document for both parties, meaning the utilities and the developers. And we brought them into the conversation very early. So you heard Dave from RNG Coalition. We invited them and people from ABC, the American Biogas Council, and project developers to provide us direct feedback into the guidance document. So when that comes out, you know, we'll make this a big event from press release. And our leadership said you ought to, because you keep saying this was the biggest barrier. So we've tried to remove that. So you ought to make this a big deal. So that's sort of looking backwards. But then looking forwards, once that guidance is out, we want to facilitate those projects, interconnect them. But we view, and I say National Grid, but my counterparts at every other utility that's looking at this, we feel that the most important thing that we as an industry from a policy perspective that we need to tackle is to decarbonize heat and develop that product. So we're going to take baby steps. And the baby steps is going to start out by developing a voluntary program, a green gas tariff. I'm going to hopefully you will see that in our, not hopefully, you will see it in our April 2019 filing. So when we do our downstate rate case in April 2019 for Long Island, New York City, we're going to offer a green gas tariff. And that's, the key word is voluntary. So these are companies, a lot of companies, and they've gone to Matt and Energy Vision.
Don't steal Nick's thunder here.
All right, so you're right. But, so that will be there. Maybe I'll just stop there and let Nick talk about that because they're actually doing it. And then we want to develop also the next demos. Newtown Creek was from wastewater and food waste. But we think what's going to be the game changer, really a true game changer for the gas network and the industry is this hydrogen conversation, so power to gas. So we are now talking to NREL, with SoCal Gas helps, they are doing power to gas. The city of New York, and if you listen to people in Massachusetts, they're going to have an awful lot of wind offshore by 2030, 2040. I mean, the city of New York wants to have 4 gigawatts. Massachusetts wants to have another 3, 4 gigawatts. If you have 8 gigawatts of wind, put aside the cost and technical, but let's say it just happens 20 years from now, where does that go at night? And we're seeing this, what I call the German model. What's happening in Germany today, they are curtailing a lot. And you heard SoCal talk about this. So, and in our conversations with NREL and other stakeholders in Europe is that you need to start thinking about this today. And if you do, the gas network actually becomes the enabler of that 2050 conversation. So with that, why don't I just stop, and then I'll be more than happy to do more Q&As.
All right, so yeah, I think the reason I'm here is CenterPoint's recent proposal to the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission. So I'll talk about that a little bit. For context, I am in the regulatory group in Minnesota. CenterPoint, some of you may be aware, has a relatively odd footprint as far as the states that we serve, right? There's Texas and Louisiana and Mississippi and Arkansas and Oklahoma, and then we've got Minnesota, right? Which is, you know, great because you've got that nice winter load. It's also a very different political climate from the rest of our footprint. So things work a little bit differently in Minnesota than they do in other parts of our other jurisdictions where we operate. But that was part of why we thought maybe this would be the best place to try something like this out. We had been thinking about RNG on and off for a while. Actually, one of the first projects I was involved with at the company 10 years ago was looking at, is there a role for us to play with RNG? What would that look like, that kind of thing. And at that time, right, this is 2008, gas prices were crazy. And landfills were able to make pipeline quality gas and cash flow with no additional support, right? You could just sell for the commodity value. And so we kind of looked at it and thought, geez, maybe now isn't really the right time. But Xcel Energy has been extremely aggressive in Minnesota and across the footprint about adding renewable generation to their portfolio and reducing the carbon footprint of their electric mix. And that has caused a lot of our external stakeholders in Minnesota to say, okay, look, pretty soon, if we're buying our electricity from Xcel, then our biggest source of emissions is going to be natural gas, even beyond transportation in some cases for some folks, right? So what are we going to do about that? And we needed an answer for them because electrification was the obvious one to a lot of folks and the one that was popping up. So that was some of the external stuff. And, you know, internally, I'd been agitating for stuff forever because I think it's neat. But I'm the policy wonk, right? I don't know anything about interconnecting. I can't go to our operations folks and say, here's what you should do and here's why you should do it. They might be willing to do it, but we didn't even know if we could have a business case for it. So we started by saying, okay, look, if people want to reduce emissions, great, let's give them that option. Let's let them put their money where their mouth is and find a way to do that. That was something that I could get my head around. Green tariffs had been around for quite a while. including in Minnesota. So we just looked at a couple of the electric ones and modeled things after that and said, okay, will this work? And then we looked at it a little bit and we're like, well, no, it won't quite. And one of the biggest reasons for that is that it's one thing to talk about, you're going to pay an extra 2 or 3 cents per kWh. It's another thing to talk about $35 gas, right? Which was basically what we knew we would be looking at. We went to a couple of suppliers and said, is this stuff out there? We were really trying to figure out if we could do it as a commodity play, not connecting directly with a producer, right? But Minnesota uses a lot of natural gas. We have no producers of natural gas in Minnesota, right? So we buy a lot of gas, and we deliver it to the system. And so maybe we could do that with RNG. And our gas supply folks said, yeah, you can do it, but these are the prices you're going to be looking at. And I sort of thought, yeah, that sounds a lot like what I've heard in other places. So yeah, we'll use $35 as our sort of estimate. But given that premium, right, we didn't want customers to say, yeah, I want 100% of my use to come from RNG, and then get the bill, and not realize what they were getting into. So we made a couple of changes to the program design that are different from what you would see in a traditional electric green tariff. One of those is that it's denominated in dollars, right? Don't tell us how many therms you want. Don't tell us how many percent of your usage you want. Tell us how much you're willing to spend, right? And that way, it's a clear deal. You know exactly what it's going to do to your bill. And we know exactly how many dollars we've got to go to the market with and try to get the best deal we can and get as much RNG as we can for that number of dollars. Another thing we did was we couldn't figure out how to make it a purely voluntary offering. Given that we were anticipating we're probably going to have at least a 12-month contract to buy the gas. Given that customers are going to be coming in and out of the program, right? Hopefully it's growing over time, but are you buying enough gas? Well, what do you do with the gas you buy early, right? How do you deal with that? So we asked the commission to give us permission to flow some of those costs through the PGA, right? Through all of our customers and basically make it portfolio gas if the program didn't have a need for it. So that's a big different thing, right? We tried to put some guardrails in that to say that there would be a maximum amount that we could pass along. But that's different and not something that the electric side is doing. And the third thing is we said, look, if this is something that Minnesota wants, if this is something that our customers want, maybe we should be allowed to make a little money on it. And we were very upfront that, let's have a business case for this. Because otherwise, we can buy gas as a pass-through all day, but why would we buy this gas instead of that gas if there's nothing in it for us? And so we proposed a shareholder incentive as part of the program. And we'll see where it goes. It's not a huge incentive relative to overall. I think our estimates were if we hit our participation goals, maybe $30,000 a year, right? But it's something. That's more than we make on the rest of our gas. So it certainly gives us an incentive. And the other thing that we did, Minnesota has a pretty robust incentive for energy efficiency. So what we did is we said, look, energy efficiency makes us a lot of money, and that's good. Minnesota has a state policy that says it's the preferred resource, and we want to pursue it ahead of all other resources. Great. So let's help the customers save as much energy as possible, and that's where we'll make the most money. If we can't figure out how to save that therm, maybe we can convince you to buy RNG for that need, and we would be incented for that. And we'd make a little less than if we'd been able to save it, but okay, great. And if we can't convince you of that, fine, you'll get standard portfolio gas, and we won't make anything on it, other than our typical delivery charge, right, which is different. So that's kind of how we structured it. We'll see where it goes. We had hoped to get comments on the filing yesterday, but there has been an extension for an extra 60 days. So comments are now due towards the end of December. And so I wouldn't anticipate a commission decision on the filing until January at the earliest, probably a little bit later than that. We'll sort of have to see where things go. Minnesota is going to have a new governor, which means We don't know who's going to be, so the current PUC's chair, I believe her term expires in mid-January, so there may be a new governor appointing a new chair of the PUC, so who knows what might happen, but stay tuned.
Excuse me. So I am Mark Maloney. I am with a company out of North Carolina called Optima Bio. We are a swine waste to energy developer. We are the first producer of natural gas to inject gas into the pipeline for the state of North Carolina. North Carolina is unique in the sense that we are actually selling not into the transport space, but into the electricity space. So the regulated utilities, as part of their RPS, have a swine carve-out, which incentivizes them to promote solutions around the swine waste, some would say, problem in the state of North Carolina. So we're the number 2 producing state behind Iowa as far as pigs go. And the industry in North Carolina is unique in the sense that it's a lot of small family farms. So when you get out into the Midwest, there are less volumes of farms, but they are much larger in size. We're talking farms in Iowa of 100,000 pigs, and I would say the largest one in North Carolina is probably 63,000, 65,000. But most of them, the average population is, I think it was like 4,300, and so they're very small scale. So the first project is called Optima KV. We started injecting into Piedmont's pipeline March 23rd of this year after about 5 years of fighting. So Don said it best that, from my perspective, the utilities, and I'm not going to make any friends with this statement, you guys are the problem, and you're standing in the way of change, of the evolution of the industry, and quite frankly, you're standing in front of your customers. I mean, your customers are calling us constantly saying, "Hey, you got any gas for us? You got any gas?" And so this is I would say a large opportunity for you sitting right in front of you. That I'm glad that these conversations are taking place because the demand is there and the feedstock and fuel sources are there, and it's simply a waste stream at this point. So it's kind of found cash. But with Optima KV, we have a hub and spoke. So there's 5 farms that we are piping raw gas to a central refinery. That refinery is a PSA system, essentially sits on top of a transmission line that Piedmont owns, so we inject right there. And we're very small scale. I mean, our PSA nameplate capacity is 300 SCFM. So, I mean, we are talking drops. I mean, we are teeny. But phase 2 of KV is we're going to daisy chain in the next 5 farms. And we're going to continue to daisy chain in those farms as we reach more into this county. So, the gas that we produce, we pay our farmers for. So this is a new ag product for the state of North Carolina, as well as being an energy source. And then our next project, I think we got final approval on Monday of last week, which is Optima TH. Not very creative on our part, but that is at the Smithfield Foods processing facility in Tar Heel, which is the largest pig processing factory in the world. I mean, it's large. And one thing that, I like to share with folks on your side of the table is that Smithfield Foods historically has been taking their gas, consuming it on site as a process heat, right? So now we're taking it, we're refining it, we're going to inject it. Smithfield's now going to be buying more natural gas from the utility because we're now injecting that gas into the pipeline. So Piedmont's going to be selling, they're going to be pushing more gas, charging more fees on the transport on the inlet side. They're charging us transport on the outlet side. So you're making twice as much on that same piece of pipe all of a sudden. I mean, this makes all the sense in the world for you guys. And, your customers, you already know those guys. I mean, you're already talking to them, you're selling them gas. It makes all the sense in the world for you to pick up the phone and say, "Hey, let's figure out a solution. we can produce a revenue stream for you, and we can sell you more gas, because that's what you want to do. So, that's really about it. I look forward to the Q&A, and, you know, hopefully I can add some positive to the conversation besides saying, you guys are the problem.
All right, thank you. That's a great intro from all three of you. So, as I said before, we have two utility representatives, one developer. Don, you touched on this, Kenzie touched on it earlier. National Grid is working with the Northeast Gas Association to put some guidelines in place, and having been involved in that process, one of the big takeaways has been really you don't speak the same language most of the time. Can you just talk a little bit about that and how you're trying to make sure that the developer and the utility is seeing eye to eye on this and being able to overcome these surmountable hurdles?
Yeah, so when, it's important, I guess, to put that in context, who was working on RNG in our company a few years ago, and who is working on it now? Who was working on it a few years ago was essentially people like Kenzie and I, the policy people and leadership, right? But the gas engineering was out of that conversation. Now, fast forward to today, if you have an RNG project and you saw the chevrons, you contact National Grid saying, I have a project. We now have a team essentially comes in that's going to be responsible for making your project happen. So the first thing is someone comes from gas engineering. They look at just very high level, where is the project coming in, at what pressure, what's your feedstock? Then that person is now essentially, she is our RNG interconnect. So we have someone who's dedicated gas engineering essentially full time. Then they come in and they talk about the next level of the people. So someone comes from gas planning. They take that data and they model it based on 24/7 influence, zone of influence. So we can actually go to the level of detail and figure out which customer could actually use this gas on that warm day in July. And then we identify those sensitive receptors. It could be like a bakery. And we said, you know, they may have an oven that may not work and they may need some tweaks. So this amount of knowledge and discussion is in that document. And it's been something that developers just, the term that Kenzie was using, the context, we look at it from that lens. So it has been, this isn't rocket science, one size does not fit all, so, but we just tell them, this is the things that we are looking into, and now they sort of get it, they're like, oh yeah, we know, and it's really about communication, and then we look at it from their lens. So their lens, they have a very different lens. They want to get into our gas system because they can't apply to EPA and get RINs under RFS. So it's essentially meeting of the minds. And the document, you know, I forgot, you were one of the people who reviewed it to essentially make this an educational document from both perspectives. And I feel like every developer, the RNG Coalition, the ABC, when they sat with us and they went and we listened to them and they listened to us, that we developed that consensus. It just seems like very intuitive, but it's not, it wasn't easy. But boy, is this very, very similar to the DG industry 20 years ago. And if I talk to my colleagues on the power side, they were saying this is the exact same story that took place on the power side 20 years ago. They wanted to, 20 years ago, distribute generation. People wanted to plug in solar, fuel cells, microturbines, and they're going to energize the grid. And the immediate reaction of the electrical engineers was like, no way, I'm not going to remove reverse power relays. If I do, you're going to energize the grid, transformers are going to blow up, and people are going to die, right? And that was literally some of the conversation 20 years ago our engineers would tell me. And then 20 years later, right, the electric industry has figured it out. There is a standard ignition guideline, and people are energizing the power, and transformers are not blowing up, and the electric industry figured it out. It is almost the exact same thing here. It's DG on the gas side.
And when this document comes out and has been vetted and published, what is your hope that it will do? Is it meant to be a model for the country, or I know you have to be careful about how you describe this.
We're going to adopt it in all of our states. So Massachusetts, you know, our utilities, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New York are going to be using this, and we're going to give this to all the developers. Because initially, right now, developers will tell you it's a black box. I knock on your door and you give me your specs. And I don't know what they look like. And if I knock on 8 utilities, they'll give me 8 different specs. So then they will get this transparency, and they're like, ah, so now I know. And we can tell them. In that data, when the tables come out, it will say a range, right? An acceptable range for siloxanes, whatever, those constituents that Christine, you were talking about. It will say lower limit, higher limit. So that they will know where that lower and higher is. And the reason we did not pick a specific number was to give them that flexibility, because one size does not fit all. It depends. Are you going to high pressure that's going to get blended away? We will lower that heat rate. But if you go into a distribution line and customers will be using that gas without blending, that higher BTU will be in place and the alarms will come in and we may shut you down quickly. But if it's higher pressure, we'll have some, leeway. So, but to answer your question, I'm not saying this will be the national standard, but I feel like every utility will look at it. It's sort of like, utilities will look at it, right, in terms of like best practice or a case study, and then they'll make their own decision. So I don't want to give this to every utility saying, hey, you ought to adopt this. But, I'm going to give it to Pam Lacey and say, Pam, share this, and hopefully it will be something that's constructive, and we as an industry need to figure this out so we don't have this issue, that Mark just said. And I feel that every developer that has been working with us has really thanked us, saying, you are really working with us, you are assigning engineers, we see the resources dedicated to this. And one thing that the project developers, the ones that have done power projects, totally understand that this is a long term, it takes, a long time. And if they have power experience, they know that these interconnections take time and they contact us very quickly. Some of the heartburn has come up from developers that have not done this at all in the energy industry. They come from other industries, but they quite frankly are very attracted to this industry because they see dollar signs, they see $40 a decatherm, and they like, can we do the interconnection agreement and sampling and everything done in 3 months? And we're like, no, it just doesn't take. So, but when they talk to other developers that have done these projects, they're like, yeah, you can't tell grid, you're going to do this thing soup to nuts in 3 months. So they have some learning to do, especially developers who are very new to the energy space.
So Nick, at CenterPoint, do you have a gas standard that's publicized or published, or how do you handle that?
Today in Minnesota, no, we don't. We are buying our gas from, most of our gas arrives via the Northern Natural Pipeline. And so we rely on their spec for most of it. We are exploring developing a quality spec. We certainly have had potential producers approach us about injecting into our system. Gas quality obviously is only one of the concerns there, but it is a real one. Northern, in addition to their standard spec that applies to all gas, has also relatively recently released guidance for biomethane producers, which we're also going to take a look at. Right now, it's not clear to us exactly how to handle an interconnection under our tariff. So conceptually, it's just a transportation tariff in reverse, right? Fair enough. But the language in our transportation tariff is pretty clearly contemplating CenterPoint being the entity that moves the gas from the TBS to the customer, who is the end user. And so that language, it's hard to shoehorn a producer into that language. So we're exploring what would it look like to create a system access tariff that would allow us to recover costs of building that interconnection, hopefully earning on it, and moving from there in a way that doesn't force the producer to bear all the costs, right? And meets everybody in the middle. So we're trying to figure both of those things out, right? What's the business case? What's the gas quality? Kind of at the same time. I'm optimistic we can move that forward in a reasonable time frame because we know there's a lot of interest, but it's not ready today for sure.
Okay, another utility question here for Don and Nick. does National Grid, does CenterPoint have kind of a greenhouse gas reduction target and timeline? And is that kind of influencing the leadership level interest in RNG, power to gas, et cetera?
So it's important to put this into the big context, because otherwise, and this is something we as a company are very committed to climate change, right? You heard Kenzie say our president goes around saying climate change is the greatest challenge that society is facing. So we also happen to be in the states, all the 3 states have adopted the 80/50, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New York. Both cities that we operate in, New York City and Boston, they want to be 80/50, if not fully decarbonized or different terms, by 2050. And we want to work with them. And RNG, you have to put that in that context. And there's a body of work emerging from Europe. I've been looking a lot at it. And it says, if you want to get to those ambitious goals, you need to decarbonize both energy systems. So that's the part of the big picture that we're telling. And it's very compelling because some of you know this. The opposite argument, and you've heard this in California maybe, and definitely the Northeast, there are advocates out there saying, let's electrify everything. Electrification of everything is the answer. And there was a great study from a very reputable firm in Europe, Poiri, that came out and said, they looked at 2 pathways how Europe can achieve that 2050 decarbonization. And they say you can electrify everything, or you can decarbonize both pathways at the same time. And if you do, the pathway that decarbonizes gas will also get there, and it will do it at €1 trillion, 1 trillion euros cheaper than electrify everything. And by the way, if you build that system that's essentially electrifying everything, it will cost 50 billion euros more per year to operate once you hit 2050. So I think what you just said is important, because we are trying to talk about to our regulators. We don't just talk about electricity and gas. We're trying to say this holistic energy system that's achieving the goal that you want, Massachusetts and New York. And we're just saying gas plays a very critical role. And that big picture context is really the reason why we're excited about renewable gas. Because when you wear that holistic hat, I mean, you heard a bunch of people talk about this, right? We are utilizing existing waste streams. And mostly it's all silos, right? Everything has been electric. People look at electricity, gas people look at gas. So why not have this holistic view? And every time we take that holistic view, gas, again, it tells a very compelling story.
I certainly agree with everything Don said with regard to electrification, and also the earlier comments about where RNG is relative to renewable electricity, and as far as, and indeed, I was, in the early 2000s, I was working with wind developers and heard all of those kinds of things. And it for me too, has rung very true, or very similar echoes now. Minnesota has a considerable wind resource, much of which gets curtailed. It actually peaks in the wind resource peaks in the shoulder months. So that's additional reason to try to find a way to use it, right? To do something with it. Now, it turns out that our wind resource is greatest down in southwest Minnesota. There's some big pipes running through there. That could make a ton of sense if we move on it. So that's, for me at least, sort of a longer term vision. In the shorter term, Minnesota has an 80/50 target. The city of Minneapolis, which is our largest city, has an 80/50 target. And then there's our other jurisdictions, right, which do not have the same public stand. So CenterPoint as an entity has not set a goal. I know that we are trying to figure out, and one of the things that I think is worth bringing up with regard to how we go forward with RNG, is that if we were to buy RNG for our portfolio, it's not clear that we could count that in our Scope 1 emissions, right, as something that would reflect reduced emissions, right? So how do you figure out how that throughput becomes properly reflected in the reporting you have to do? So that's an area that I think is worth exploring. But as far as planting a flag and saying we're going to get to X percent as a company, we haven't yet taken that stand.
Okay, Mark, you mentioned Smithfield and kind of the top-down drive there to kind of be sustainable in an industry that's often thought of as not, to put it lightly. I mean, how much of it is top-down there, and are you seeing that among others in the agricultural sector?
Yep. So Smithfield has I'm not a Smithfield employee, so I don't know this, but it's like something by 25, right? And the CEO of Smithfield Foods is out there every day pushing this because the ag industry is definitely becoming more of a focus in this fight. And I believe Tyson, all of the big poultry houses, I think just the other week, put out a press release, a joint effort. They're looking at this. I mean, and so Smithfield Foods, they have a sustainability officer now, but their consumers are requesting this of them as much as it is a way to keep costs down. So no, I mean, Smithfield has a division that manages the farms, a division that manages the factories, and Smithfield Renewable. So they have a renewables team, an arm, that are now going through every asset that they own and finding ways to not only save energy, but also create revenue. So no, this is definitely something that Smithfield is very active in promoting. And I know they're going to be doing some press here in the next couple of weeks about some other large efforts down in our part of the world. But the ag industry and the food packaging brands are definitely pushing this way in a very fast and focused kind of effort. So I think we'll see a lot of it here in the near future.
So we've heard a lot about the importance of policy, whether it's the RFS, the LCFS, kind of state level RPS programs. Clearly there's a big gap between geologic gas pricing and the price point that the developer needs in order to finance a project and make this work. Certainly there are things that the LDCs need to make the economics work, to make the business case happen. I mean, Mark, can you speak at all about what that price point is and what you're looking for, what the financiers are looking for to write you a check to build a project like this?
Sure. So the largest single capital component of our first project was the interconnection. The largest single component of our second project is the interconnection. So, I mean, from a developer's perspective, we can only control so much, our costs. We can't control the utility side of things. And so transparency and understanding more about what goes into that would be helpful. Now that we have one running, you know, they don't cost as much as we're being charged for. So, you know, from my perspective, part of, you know, driving that cost down for utilities and consumers is for utilities to get your costs down. And, you know, I think that goes against the grain of the incentive structures, at least for regulated utilities, is, you know, kind of the bigger the ticket, the return stays the same. And in my space, you can't be inefficient with capital. I mean, we have to compete. Utilities, I know there's a handful of them, who you get a guaranteed return on your capital, whether it's $100 or $200, you're going to still make that. But net, the gross amount of cash that you're going to get back is larger. So it's almost like a disincentive to be efficient. Now, the price of natural gas, that's the market. So, you know, I have a lot of folks say, well, that's crazy, I'm not paying that. Well, don't. You're not the market then, you know. Come back when you're ready to pay that much. But we're not selling into the transport space, so we haven't been able to participate in this run-up. Some days I wish we had. But, you know, we took a certainty we took certainty over price. So selling into the power space, we have a 15-year fixed deal, so I know how much we're going to make every day for the next 15 years, and I'll take that. So there's different models and requirements from an investor's perspective. You know, I'm probably not even going to touch anything less than a 15. It's not worth the time, not worth the pain, not worth all of that that comes with it. And I think Luke, if he's here, said earlier about banks and financing, and then the Amoresco developer said about, you know, there's not a lot of banks to help fund these things, and so the equity check is quite large too. So we're putting a lot of this on our own heads and risking a lot of capital. So maybe there's a model there where the utilities can work with us. I mean, in Piedmont and with KV, we had to cut a check, strike a check up front before they do anything, before they lift a finger, and that's a large check to strike up front. So if you guys are able to rate base it, that's awesome. I mean, that helps us, that provides a return for you guys, and that's kind of a win-win. The questions I have around that, though, are, you know, do the ratepayers really need to pick that up? I don't know. That's not really something I dive into very, very much, but, you know, hopefully that answered your question. I'll write them down next time, so don't forget.
So I'd agree with a certain amount of what Mark said, in particular around the idea of, you know, trying to find a way for the utility to help absorb some of that capital burden, right? If you can rate base something. I think there is a question about, is this where you want utility capital, right? If you're a state regulator, should ratepayers be carrying that risk for the project? If you can create a tariff around it, it may be, you know, you may be able to create a particular customer class around it, right? So that, you know, if you, when you do your class cost of service study, maybe you can isolate those costs directly to the people who are asking you to build the interconnects rather than having the residential customers pick it up. But that's, there's still going to be a question there. If they go belly up, you know, somebody's going to have to absorb those costs, right? So there is I think a policy question around that. There was something else you touched on that I wanted to. So I do think that the tariff approach is but that's part of why we're exploring it as sort of a way to get this forward.
So I do want to open it up here shortly to the audience, but one last, I think, big picture point that we are often encountering, and mind you, we're based in New York. Don is often in New York. The environmental community in New York is very different than lots of other parts of the country, but you mentioned the push to electrify everything, this idea that the future is 100% electric, 100% renewable. I think we're constantly battling that as an independent environmental organization that wants to see progress in the form of projects and investment and kind of sustainability-driven initiatives. But you know, what's been your experience for all three of you, kind of dealing with regulators and or policymakers in terms of how familiar are they with renewable natural gas, and how much more do we need to kind of coalesce around this as a strategy that can be really impactful across all the different pieces in this value chain?
Well, maybe I'll start. It sounds like a cliche, but education is such a critical item, and I feel like the story. So, climate change. We talked about you know, the greatest challenge humanity faces. That's what our president says. It also happens to be the most complicated engineering problem, right? And I've spent a lot of time battling stakeholders who got to our policymakers with a very simple message. And I've been literally in a public library in Boston where an environmentalist showed up with a poster, big poster, and there was two pictures, a wind turbine and a solar panel, and they just said, we need more of these. If we have more of these, we'll solve climate change. And the policymaker who has a, you know, political science background, they get it. To them, it's simple. They're like, oh yeah, that makes sense if you just had more of these. But when I speak, I sound like very nuanced. I'm like, well, you know, what are the implications if you go from summer peaking to winter peaking? And if you put all that renewable, that's incremental, you have to derate it. And they're like, yes. So what happens is, I don't have that very simple story to tell, but the good news is, not only I and all of my counterparts, and I talk to my colleagues in the UK, and I talk to people who have sort of my job, but they were head of this in Enbridge in Canada and in Germany. We will win the argument, not because we're compelling, but because once you do the math, it becomes self-evident. And people haven't done the homework. And I've been surprised, like someone said, a policymaker said, let's just electrify everything in the city of New York. Haven't done any, but just tell me why is that not practical? So I asked very simple question. Do you know what we do today? How much gas does grid deliver on a peak day? And I said, do you know the answer? Like, I don't know. And I kind of gave a provider, and I said, we deliver about 2 BCF per day on a peak day. Con Ed probably delivers more, right? I mean, Bill, you probably deliver more than we do. So we deliver 2 BCF. Con Ed delivers, let's say, another 2 BCF on a peak day. And I say, if you take 4 to 5 BCF on that peak day, and if you just do back of the envelope, translate that to terawatt hours, and then translate that to the amount of electricity that's delivered over 24 hours, is like 60 gigawatts. So that's like, did you know that? And they're like, oh, I didn't know that. And it's that fundamental. But it's funny, in their head, they had that policy made. So in their head, they were ready to propose a policy, let's electrify everything, but they hadn't done this simple, very simple math, for at least what seems simple to me. And if you do the analysis on peak to peak, the gas system on the peak day delivers the amount of energy that's in multiples of the electric system. And Enbridge did a really nice presentation when they were discussing it on Ontario. I think they said that the gas system delivers something like 80 gigawatts on that cold day in January, but the electric system on the peak day delivers something like 24, 25. So it's 3 to 1, and it does it on 30 cents on a dollar. And the people who advocate this don't know this. So it starts with that, and it's like I said, over time they do change their position. But what I found very interesting is that people have formed their position without having done the homework, and then once they do the homework, and they sort of have that aha moments. But it is an uphill battle, because again, the story I'm telling is sort of, it's got a lot more nuance than just simply holding a poster of saying, we just need more of these, and we'll solve the problem. But it's reality. Nick?
Yeah, so I remember what I was going to say a second ago, which is about cost and price, and trying to remember the difference between those two, right? Right now, the price of RNG is crazy high, largely because of policy mechanisms like LCFS and the RFS. The cost of projects isn't necessarily anywhere near that, especially if you talk about the lifetime levelized cost of that gas. And so I think there's room for that to come down, and to the extent that we can figure out deals that allow us to move away from these sort of crazy short-term prices, that's going to be good in general from a utility perspective. So electrification, yes, everything Don said. We did a survey of our customers when we were first starting to think about our Green Tariff program. And one of the first question we asked was, have you ever heard of renewable natural gas? And 2/3 of them said no. All right, so right there's a lot to do, right? Our regulators are definitely in those 2/3. Many of our external political stakeholders are also in those 2/3. And I think it's also probably fair to say that a large number of environmental advocates are as well, right? The reason that they're pushing for electrify everything is that they care about climate change. Natural gas is a fossil fuel, and that's a bad thing, right? And that's not misguided as far as it goes, right? But it's also like, if there's no alternative, of course that's what you have to do, right? And so understanding what the alternatives are, and yes, it's expensive if you're comparing it to the price of gas right now, but it's a lot cheaper than electrifying. And oh yeah, energy efficiency, right? So that's kind of, there's a lot of education that needs to happen. Obviously, in any conversation, the nuanced message that's backed up by facts that you're trying to be responsible with is the one that's hardest to get across. But that's not, this is hardly the first time where that's become apparent.
Hello. All right. The education piece, vital. Most most folks look at us as a monster, like, oh, renewable natural gas is so dangerous. And I can tell you now, from swine waste, our gas has 5 things in it. None of the long chain carbons are there. So, we have very, very clean gas, and the employees of Piedmont on the ground, the guys who turn the valve open for us, they tell us this is cleaner, consistent, drier gas than what's in our pipeline. They won't tell you that publicly, but they'll tell you that on the ground. And so we're very proud of that. But I also think what's important for us is the RNG sector needs to get better at messaging. Those long chain carbons are dangerous. The enes and the anes are dangerous. They're cancer causing more so than CH4. We don't have that in our gas. So I think we could, talking from a developer's perspective, I think if we got our message together, we can put together a very persuasive kind of educational packet on why our gas is actually better for the industry, for the users. And then on the pricing thing, we buy gas for cars right now, unleaded, mid, and premium. We should have a similar tier in the natural gas space. There's blue and there's green. And, the spread's probably not going to be $1, but so there are commodities out there that are priced according to the quality. And, so I just kind of see the market going in that way. And, you guys are the smart policy folks that can create the model around that. But we obviously got to work together on it. So.
Okay, with that, I'd like to open it up to the audience for. Go ahead.
So my question is for Don. You talked a little bit in response to one of the early questions about sort of some of the different people in your company that have to look at an interconnection project and some of the staff that is required. And I was wondering if you could talk a little more about all of the different departments and what the staffing requirements are to make one of these, or to maintain an interconnection program.
Yeah, so it starts out with gas engineering. So we have this whole asset group, but asset breaks into the gas engineering wants to look at where are you injecting and at what pressure. So they start from there. And our gas planning, then, they're all under asset. They all then look at the zone of influence. So they model it on a 24/7 period and seeing which customers are what we call sensitive receptors that could use this gas. Kenzie was talking about this. And also our INR, instrumentation and regulation, I think most utilities called INR. They look at, do we need to change any therm zone billing in that area? And I guess all that modeling does that. And that's something I quite frankly didn't know. I've been in the industry for a long time, and I had to learn all about how we do therm zone billing. So they do the therm zone billing, modeling, and they want, the other thing that gas engineering looks at, I never thought we would have this problem. Can we actually take the gas based on all the time? And the reason I mentioned this, when I looked at Newtown Creek and New York City, what we're injecting is so tiny, so we could essentially inject gas 24/7. But there are actually projects in upstate New York that are from livestock manure. Quite frankly, they're in the middle of nowhere, that we may not be actually take that gas based on 24/7. And I just didn't know that would happen, because there is a pipe that's just essentially feeding like 6 customers, and there is no load on that gas in the middle of the night in winter. So we're working with that developer how to solve that problem. Do you store it on site? There's multiple solutions that you can actually get around this. So all of these things will be in that guidance document, but that's what I mean when internally, when you start taking this seriously, it started including all of these people that I just mentioned. And oh, Tom is here. I forgot. LNG. Tom is here, head of our, and the reason he's here, our LNG operations is going to be responsible for operating the Newtown Creek project. So, but that's unique because we own that one. We've assigned operation of any of these plants to LNG, and I think, the stuff that's at Newtown Creek, the pressures and the vessels, people who run the LNG plants are very familiar with them. And they look at this, so like, these are the exact same things that we have in our LNG plant, and they're at a lot less pressure. It's much easier to, quite frankly, operate this than what we operate in terms of equipment. So all of these people are involved in getting a RNG project up and running.
Nick, you mentioned the survey that y'all did in Minnesota at a time. Previously, or earlier, you had mentioned also, we'll see if the demand is there. You made a comment along those lines. So obviously you saw something in those results. Can you just kind of speak to what that something was that made you move forward in Minnesota? And then maybe also if you can talk about kind of the size of the customers. Were you looking at all your residentials, or were you looking at kind of your big users of gas, and kind of talk to us a little bit more about that?
So we actually did two surveys. The first one went to both residential and C&I customers. And we asked them, would you be willing to use RNG in your home or business? And 75% of them answered positively, right? Either definitely or maybe. So then we said, would you be willing to pay more to use RNG? And 50% of them said yes. So, okay, so a few drop off, but 50% is still pretty good, right? And then we asked them, how much more are you willing to spend? And the answers were resoundingly in the $5 to $20 range, right? So, okay, fair enough. But something like 50% saying they're ready to kick in $5 to $20 was kind of what suggested maybe there was something here. Our second survey was aimed primarily at, well, actually exclusively at residential customers, and was geared, it asked some of the same questions, but was geared more towards figuring out whether there was one program design of a couple of different ideas we were considering that would be more appealing than another. And we didn't really find that any one of them made a big difference. It did kind of, we got very similar results as far as the number of folks who said they would be willing to participate, so it sort of confirmed some of the findings from the other study. But it has been really focused on residential customers. We've had a tougher time getting the attention of some of our larger C&I customers, even those with fairly considerable green commitments. Target, Best Buy, Aveda, a number of these folks have operations or headquarters in Minnesota, and we thought they'd be all over, but it was hard to get in front of them for a couple of different reasons, I think. One of them is price. But I think we also need to actually have something there for them to say yes or no to. It was harder to sort of say, hey, if we did this, what would you think? So we'll see how it goes in the regulatory process.
So I have a quick just comment on that. Sorry to interrupt. It's analogous to what we're talking about, I believe. So 10, 15 years ago, electric utilities were out selling RECs. And then, RECs were like 50 cents a dollar, and they were marking these things up like 2,000%. And I was in that space at the time, and it made those utilities look greedy and bad. So if I can suggest anything to the natural gas utilities, is don't follow that model. It'll eventually come out. So if you're buying it for $10 or $15, and then you're piecing it up into 1,000 parts and charging $5, and you're making $500, you're going to kill your customers' trust in you and what you're trying to sell them. So I think you need to be cognizant of that. Don't get seeing the numbers and get the math and get crazy.
This is more for Donald and Nick, and more of a comment. You guys spoke about the basically decarburizing the energy infrastructure.
Sorry, can you just tell us who you are? And
I am Scott Rising with Black Hills Energy. And one comment that I wanted to make was you had basically touched on the number of gigawatts equivalent that the gas that we provide is. One piece to also keep in mind, and I talk about this sometimes when I'm out with people, but no one's developed a city-sized battery yet where we can take renewable electricity and hold on to it. There's a lot of talk about energy to gas, which I think is a great idea, but natural gas and renewable natural gas has a property that electricity doesn't have yet, and that's the ability to store, the ability to be able to take it out of storage and use it when you need it, to convert it back into electricity if needed. And so there was just a couple of comments that I thought might be, just useful based on what we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. I think also exciting when you start thinking about power to gas is the ability of those systems to act not just as storage, but actually as grid resources to help sort of stabilize things on the grid. Because the electrolyzer that's making the hydrogen can ramp up and down very quickly. So it's a very sort of easily dispatchable load in that sense for the electric folks. So I think there may be some grid value that can actually, in addition to just free electricity because that would otherwise go to waste, maybe you're bringing value to the electric grid, right? And maybe that's worth something.
Yeah, and violent agreement. Remember, I just said it's compelling argument, and I didn't talk about it, and we were the last panel. So Matt was like, no slides. We don't want anybody sleeping. But I had actually a slide. You'll see when EPA posts it up, and it essentially tells what you just said. Because what makes it compelling, we solve the biggest weakness of the power industry. What's their biggest weakness? Intermittency or variable and storage. And without getting into batteries, and I'm not a battery expert, but I've done my due diligence. I think I've read as many as white paper as there are and talked to people, and they say batteries will work on tens of megawatts hours. Once you get to thousands and gigawatts, you can't have a gigawatt battery. So you solve both of those problems simultaneously, and then you're really in a good place as a gas network. The one thing that I do want to say, and when you all thinking about the next steps, how do we make this happen? I spoke to a regulator. How do we become successful? And he is like, you're going to go talk to people, but you are preaching to the choir. You want to move the needle, tell the people in the room, especially project developers, intervene in your rate cases. So my message to you, and I don't know, Jerome, if EPA can even do it, but intervene. It could be a one-page testimony, because he was saying that's how we make public policy. And if you say RNG is great and developers say RNG is great and we agree with you, actually nothing gets done. But if you file a testimony and intervene, then we have to respond. So I'm not telling you what to say, but I'm saying when we file, and every other utility, we're going to file in April 2019 for a downstate, your being an intervener and even one-page testimony actually adds a lot. And the one page could be very simple. We support RNG, and you could challenge us, right? You could say, is Grid doing enough to support RNG, to promote it? And they have to respond. And if they respond, then we have to respond. So I just thought that should be a key takeaway. And this was great to get that feedback came from a regulator saying, get even, organizations such as, Energy Vision. We have these workshops that are very constructive, but essentially tell the people that want RNG to happen, intervene in our rate cases.
The other thing I want to say is, I think the point that Mark made about the credibility of the product that you're selling is really critical. And so currently there's no certification standard for green tariffs for gas, right? That's something that I think is going to be important in order to get especially larger customers to sign up. But it gets to the bigger point of you need to be very careful about not overselling the benefits, right? We know that there are a lot of benefits of RNG, but it is possible to overstate them, and don't, because you're going to shoot the industry in the foot, right? One of those things, right? So we saw from SoCal earlier that there's a lot of RNG out there, right? A TCF of RNG. That's potential, right? It's not out there today. And we use 22 TCF every year. So there's still a big gap. That's a lot of geologic gas that we've got to deal with if we're serious about climate, right? And how we do that, right? I think power to gas could be a big part of that solution. Energy efficiency has to be part of that solution. And but there's got to be other things as well. And I have no idea what those are going to look like. But we can't pretend that 10% is going to get us all the way there.
New question.
Just a little plug. My favorite idea is that we need some research and development on reformulators that are more affordable. Get to the reformulator in every garage, reformulator at the Target and big box stores. And then what you can do is use your infrastructure to still deliver natural gas, but you're taking the carbon out at or close to the customer. And you have to capture it as a solid. That's the other catch. But, yeah.
Luke Morrow with the question, or really a comment, and mostly for Nick, but also for everyone that's a utility. You know, one of the things as part of the coalition that we worked on was a bill that a lot of the utilities in California were on board for, which was having a fixed price plus some sort of variable price that's lower than the market. But we've talked about $30 market, but our market changes every year. We had a 40% drop this year over last year. And, there's a lot of complaints about none of this is financeable really, because unless you take a much lower price because you need something that is solid. This is somewhere where, utilities can step in and say, hey, look, maybe the market's 30, but maybe we'll give you 20. But we're going to take that gas and take it to the higher price market. But we want RNG in our system. We can make money on it, or like you were saying, you could find a way to rate base it out or something. But I think a lot of people in our industry are not saying we're not saying, hey, we have to have $30. We're saying we want stability. We want a way to get a payback on these projects, and utilities can play a big role in that. And I just wanted to kind of throw that out there and get your response or your reaction.
I'd agree that there's a lot of room for creative thinking around how to make things like that work. It's tough under traditional regulation when the utility has a least cost mandate to just go buy the stuff, right? And whether you're allowed to sell to buy it at a low cost and sell it on and share, like that's stuff you've got to get permission to do it from your regulator first, right? So I think there is a huge component of this that's going to be driven by policy, right? How do you get policies in place that sort of tell the utility, we want you to be in this business, we want you to be exploring these creative ideas, put some guardrails up there because there needs to be protections for customers. But yes, this is a thing that we want you to try to figure out. I think if you can get that done, then you can start having some of those more creative conversations.
And I just want to pile on what Nick just said. If you came to Grid and said, I want to sell you, we can't compete with $30, $50 decatherm RIN. But if you said, Grid, are you willing to buy $15 decatherm for 20 years? I want to say yes, and our leadership will agree, but we can't. Based on what Nick said, we would need the regulatory approval, which comes back to full circle, intervene now, and that's why I remember we're taking baby steps. The baby step, what are we doing? We're trying to do a voluntary program. So these are customers that are willing to pay a premium. And then what would happen next? You say, well, if you have a voluntary program, why don't you, they'll see the benefits. And then we move into that area there, what you're saying. Then it gives us the authority to sign those long-term contracts. At least that's how I see it, the evolution of that market.
So one thought that just popped into my head with your program being voluntary. So we had a customer of yours reach out to us 2 weeks ago for a project, and they're very interested in doing it. As a developer, I would say to you, well, let's figure this out. Let's make it work. And I'm more than happy to, if you let me get 70% of that gas to California, I'll give you dibs on the first 30%. And, if your customers buy it up, it's yours. If they don't buy it, then I can send it to California still. So maybe there's a model where we work out a deal like that. And, that helps drive the cost down. That helps get your foot kind of wet with the renewable gas piece. It gives you the option of not having to commit to buying the gas, but that you kind of have a reserve or like an option on it. I mean, from my perspective, that would be attractive. So.
And that very model is something that's actually occurred to us as far as just sort of a right of first refusal to buy the gas for the program. And if not, you move it on, and find a customer for it. Again, we're not there today, but it's somewhere I'd like to go.
So I have a question. I'm Bill Slade, Con Edison. I'm Don's partner in crime in the New York City metropolitan area selling gas. So the name of the panel is RNG Policy, Financial Incentives, and Market Forces. Is a nationwide carbon tax the silver bullet that takes care of all three of those?
I don't think we're going to go there.
I was gonna go there. I'll go.
How long do we have?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go there, Bill. Yes, in a nutshell, if that happened, the answer is yes. And it's interesting, we've done some analysis, we consultants, the bigger the tax, the better the gas looks, roughly speaking. But in the absence of that, yes, but totally agree. If you had a carbon tax, it changes the whole dynamic nationally. So I went there.
So I mostly agree. Part of the trouble, though, is that the carbon tax puts natural gas in general at a strategic advantage, right, relative to other fossil fuels. So given that the problem is already that you're competing with other uses for RNG, I'm hesitant to say it's a silver bullet. That doesn't mean that it's a bad thing, but I'm not certain it would solve all our problems. It would solve some problems and not address others. And again, in order to make to really feel the carbon tax, it's going to have to be pretty substantial.
It solves the problem of comparing expensive gas for $3 a decatherm, right? Because that's what every regulator does today. Like, why would I pay $15 a decatherm if you can buy the gas for $3? It helps solve that issue. Was there one last question?
I think that's it. We're right on time here. So, I mean, I just want to close with a quick plug for AGA, for EPA's voluntary programs, the RNG Coalition, certainly Energy Vision. There are a lot of people working more collaboratively to advance this topic, this strategy. Regional workshops. Several of the last workshops have been with LDCs, SoCalGas, PG&E, Northwest Natural, National Grid. There's clearly a big growth in interest. The number of projects has almost doubled in the last 4 or 5 years. So we're very excited to kind of see this trajectory continue. And I encourage all of you to take advantage of the resources that are here in this room and to use this, to your advantage. So with that, I think we'll close with a round of applause for the panel, and hopefully it was productive.